The Angel of Death, also known as Beverley Allitt, was not your typical nurse. Instead of protecting the lives of children, she took their last breath. And with that, I'm Cassie.
I'm Sarah. Now let's talk about the Angel of Death. Early in her life, Beverley exhibited some worrying tendencies while growing up as one of 4 children, including wearing bandages and casts over wounds that she would use to draw attention to herself, without actually allowing the injuries to be examined. Becoming overweight as an adolescent, she became increasingly attention-seeking, often showing aggression towards others. She spent considerable amounts of time in hospitals seeking medical attention for a string of physical ailments, which culminated in the removal of her perfectly healthy appendix, which was slow to heal as she insisted on interfering with the surgical scar. She was also known to self-harm and had to resort to doctor hopping as medical practitioners became familiar with her attention-seeking behaviors. Beverley's behavior in adolescence appeared to be typical of Munchausen syndrome, and when this behavior failed to elicit the desired reactions in others, she began to harm others in order to satisfy her desire to be noticed. She went on to train as a nurse and was suspected of odd behavior, such as smearing feces on walls in a nursing home where she trained. Her absentee level was also exceptionally high, the result of a string of illnesses. Her boyfriend at the time said later that she was aggressive, manipulative, and deceptive, claiming false pregnancy as well as rape before the end of the relationship. Despite her history of poor attendance and successive failure of her nursing examinations, she was taken on a temporary 6-month contract at the chronically understaffed Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire in 1991, where she began work in the children's ward. There were only 2 trained nurses on the day shift and 1 for nights when she started, which might explain how her violent, attention-seeking behavior went undetected for as long as it did.
So when she was little, she started off by kind of faking injuries.
Yeah.
Which I find really interesting because it sounds like a lot of the ones she was faking were pretty serious, but the doctors didn't question it, with her appendix. They took the appendix out, but it was perfectly fine. I don't know what the medical field looked like back
in the 90s.
It probably would have been even earlier.
The 80s.
In the 80s, but wouldn't they have known if an appendix was bad?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because people had their appendix taken out all the time, so I feel like
I would assume, but I wonder kind of what her parents were thinking of.
Well, it makes me wonder, were they kind of crazy?
I don't know. I think it's very interesting. And then later in her life, one of her ex-boyfriends said that she was really manipulative and would kind of do things to keep that attention on her. Maybe not the same as faking injuries, but faking her pregnancy and stuff like that.
And saying rape.
Yeah, to kind of keep the whole attention thing on her, whether it was from him or from other people.
Which is crazy.
Very, very interesting. It's very interesting, and wait until we read further because it gets wild.
On February 21st, 1991, her first victim was 7-month-old Liam Taylor. He was admitted to the children's ward with a chest infection. Beverley went out of her way to reassure his parents that he was in capable hands and persuaded them to go home and get some rest. When they returned, she told them that Liam had suffered a respiratory emergency, but that he had recovered. She volunteered for extra night duty so she could watch over him, and his parents chose to spend the night at the hospital as well. Liam had another respiratory crisis just before midnight, but it was felt that he'd come through it. Beverley was left alone with Liam, and his condition worsened dramatically, becoming deathly pale before red blotches appeared on his face, at which point she summoned an emergency resuscitation team. Beverley's nursing colleagues were confused by the absence of alarm monitors at the time, which had failed to sound when he stopped breathing. Liam suffered cardiac arrest, and despite the best efforts of the attending team, he suffered severe brain damage and remained alive only with the help of life support machines. At medical advice, his parents made the agonizing decision to remove their baby from life support, and his cause of death was recorded as heart failure. Beverley was never questioned about her role in Liam's death. 5-month-old Paul Crampton became Beverley's next victim, placed in the ward on March 20th, 1991 as a result of a non-serious bronchial infection. Just prior to his discharge, she was again attending a patient by herself, summoned for help as Paul appeared to be suffering from insulin shock, going into a near coma on 3 separate occasions. Each time the doctors revived him, but were unable to explain the fluctuation in his insulin levels. When he was taken by ambulance to another hospital in Nottingham, Beverley rode with him. He was again found to have too much insulin. Paul was extremely fortunate to have survived the ministrations of the angel of death. Do you think it's strange that the doctors aren't suspicious about what's going on with the kids?
Well, so kind of for context, there were more than just, like, more in between these guys. We just picked a couple of them who understood what was going on. I do think it's a little weird that no one was like, that's an awful lot of children dying kind of out of the blue, especially when they were coming in with...
Not serious.
I don't want to say minor, but not like...
Life-threatening.
Generally life-threatening, yeah. I think that the nurses are starting to kind of be like...
why isn't she sounding... like alarms or anything, or why aren't monitors going off? But they're like they're probably also thinking, oh, things happen all the time, like it's probably like a fluke or something.
Well, that's the thing, like hospitals, so much go on, so like, you know, like you could accidentally get an infection from whatever. Like if things aren't clean or whatever, so maybe they're just like, oh, you know.
I just still think it's suspicious, like for Liam, every time something went wrong, she was the one
that was there.
I
would think that someone would be pretty suspicious of that, but I mean, I don't know. I've never worked in a hospital, so it could just be so crazy that, you know, you don't really know what's going on, but I do find it interesting that she kind of was getting away with this.
Beverley next turned her attention to twins Katie and Becky Phillips, just 2 months old, who were kept in for observation as a result of their premature delivery. A bout of gastroenteritis brought Becky into the ward on April 1st, 1991, when Beverley took over her care. 2 days later, she raised the alarm, claiming that Becky appeared hypoglycemic and cold to the touch, but no ailment was found. Baby Becky was sent home with her mother. During the night, when she went into convulsions and cried out in apparent pain, a doctor suggested she had colic. The parents kept her in their bed for observation, and she died during the night. Despite an autopsy, pathologists could find no clear cause of death. Becky's surviving twin, Katie, was admitted to Grantham as a precaution, and unfortunately for her, Beverley was again in attendance. It wasn't long before she was again summoning a resuscitation team to revive baby Katie, who had stopped breathing. Efforts to revive Katie were successful, but 2 days later she suffered a similar attack, which resulted in the collapse of her lungs. Following another revival effort, she was transferred to Nottingham, where it was found that 5 of her ribs were broken, in addition to having suffered serious brain damage as a result of oxygen deprivation. In a supreme twist of irony, Katie's mother, Sue Phillips, was so grateful to Beverley for saving her baby's life that she asked her to be Katie's godmother. She accepted willingly, despite having inflicted partial paralysis, cerebral palsy, and sight and hearing damage on the infant. 4 more victims followed, but the high incidence of unexplained attacks in otherwise healthy patients and Beverley's attendance during these attacks finally caused suspicion to be raised at the hospital.
In the story of Katie and Becky, at the end, the twins' mother asked Beverley to be Katie's godmother? What do you think of that?
We know what's going on. I think it's ridiculous, but obviously Katie's mother does not, so she thinks that she's like, you saved my like other baby. You saved my like last child. Thank you so much. How can I repay you? Please be her godmother. So like if Sue knew, she'd be like,
obviously,
no, but
I just think it's interesting. Like, I wonder if Beverley had to do a lot of like manipulating. You know what I mean? To like, I mean, I'm assuming, right? To put on this show of like,
I feel like she's definitely have to like sweet talk these parents and stuff, like how she did with Liam. Like she was like, oh, you guys should just go home. I'll take care of him. He's in great hands. She's gotta be like the best sweet talker ever.
Which I think kind of goes back to like her boyfriend's story of just her being like super manipulative and stuff. But I just think it's so I can't even imagine, you know, like you bring your like basically 2 newborn babies in because they have gastro stuff going on, and then one ends up dying in the hospital when you didn't.
No, I think she died.
Well, she died at home, but like brought her in and like it was kind of a result of it. And then to bring the other one in just in case, And then all this crazy stuff started happening. I can't even, when she brought Katie in, the second baby, it was kind of just as a checkup, but then she ended up having brain damage and
cerebral palsy
and hearing problems. I can't even imagine taking your child into the hospital and then, no, you're taking your children to the hospital
and then coming
and only
out
leaving with one who will never be the same again.
Her violent spree was brought to an end with the death of 15-month-old Claire Peck on April 22, 1991, an asthmatic who required a breathing tube. While in Beverly's care for only a few minutes, the infant suffered a heart attack. The resuscitation team revived her successfully, but when again alone in Beverly's presence, baby Claire suffered a second attack from which she could not be revived. Although an autopsy indicated that Claire had died from natural causes, an inquiry was initiated by a consultant at the hospital, Dr. Nelson Porter, who was alarmed by the high number of cardiac arrests over the previous 2 months in the children's ward. An airborne virus was initially suspected, but nothing was found. A test that revealed a high level of potassium in baby Claire's blood resulted in the police being summoned 18 days later. Her exhumation discovered traces of lignocaine in her system, a drug used during cardiac arrest, but never given to a baby. The police superintendent assigned to the investigation suspected foul play, and he examined the other suspicious cases that had occurred in the previous 2 months, finding inordinately high doses of insulin in most. Further evidence revealed that Beverly had reported the key missing to the insulin refrigerator. All records were checked, parents of the victims were interviewed, and a security camera was installed. Suspicions were raised when record checks revealed missing daily nursing logs, which corresponded to the time period when Paul Crampton had been in the ward. When 25 suspicious episodes with 13 victims were identified, 4 of whom were dead, the only common factor was the presence of Beverley Allitt at every episode. After everything, somebody finally noticed.
Yeah, someone's starting to get a little more
suspicious,
so they ended up having the police look into it. And they started to connect the dots that Beverly was at every
scene
attack.
Yeah.
And that she was the one who had reported the missing key for the insulin refrigerator. So she wasn't, I mean, I don't know, I think it's interesting because if you think about it, she didn't really like hide the fact that she was involved very well. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know, I think maybe what she was thinking was, if I tell them that the insulin key to the refrigerator is missing,
you'll like get away from
they won't be like, well, if she did it, she wouldn't tell us that it's missing.
So let's read some more and see what ended up happening to Beverly.
By July 26, 1991, police felt they had sufficient evidence to charge her with murder, but it wasn't until November 1991 that she was formally charged. Beverly showed calm and restraint under interrogation, denying any part in the attacks, insisting she had merely been caring for the victims. A search of her home revealed parts of the missing nursing log. Further extensive background checks by the police indicated a pattern of behavior that pointed to a very serious personality disorder, and she exhibited symptoms of both Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which are both characterized by getting attention through illness. Her behavior in adolescence appeared to be typical of Munchausen syndrome, and when this behavior failed to elicit the desired reactions in others, she began to harm her young patients in order to satisfy her desire to be noticed. Despite visits and assessments by a number of healthcare professionals while in prison, she refused to confess what she had done. After a series of hearings, she was charged with 4 counts of murder, 11 counts of attempted murder, and 11 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. As she awaited her trial, she rapidly lost weight and developed anorexia nervosa, a further indication of her psychological problems. After numerous delays due to her illnesses, she went to trial at Nottingham Crown Court on February 15, 1993, where prosecutors demonstrated to the jury how she had been present at each suspicious episode and the lack of episodes when she was taken off the ward. After a trial that lasted nearly 2 months, Beverly was convicted on May 23, 1993, and given 13 life sentences sentences for murder and attempted murder. It was the harshest sentence ever delivered to a female, but according to Mr. Justice Latham, it was commensurate with the horrific sufferings of the victims, their families, and the disgrace she had brought upon nursing as a profession.
So, out of all the types of people that she could kind of go after, why do you think she chose children?
I think she chose children because, one, they're an easy target.
Yeah.
They're weaker than we are. Two, people tend to care more and pay attention to children more.
Yeah.
And and three, if a child gets severely harmed, you know it's gonna be in newspapers and on television. So that's basically ways for her to
get as much attention as possible.
Which she wants.
And at least in the hospital setting, she's surrounded by illness all the time, so she can kind of conjure up different illnesses for these kids or whatever, and then she could have also gone after elderly
people
is what I was thinking, but more attention is paid to young children, whereas sometimes in nursing homes and stuff people forget about them.
I was just gonna
and it's not, I mean, it's still, there's a lot of attention around it, but not as much as young children dying. So in the end, she did all of this because she wasn't getting enough attention to herself anymore, because people kind of figured out her game, that she would fake things. So she decided,
let me hurt other people
and kind of get the glory, I'm their savior, which she did, especially with Katie and Becky's mom.
She became the godmother. Just
crazy, unreal. I don't know, sometimes when we read about these people, I forget that, this is real life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This really seriously happened. I feel like sometimes we forget that these things, because obviously we haven't experienced them, we haven't been put in a situation where we need to
It's the only time I've heard of things like this was reading it in a book, not based on true events. It's just somebody.
Yeah. Near us, we haven't had any, anything in the news, where, say, a serial killer, for instance, was around us, but we live in a really small area.
Yeah.
So sometimes I forget that this is real life.
Yeah.
And
it's crazy.
It's really disgusting. Could be that twisted to, especially go after children, to go after anybody in general, but children, babies, they're, just starting out in life. I don't know. That's so sad.
If you want to hear about somebody else that suffers from Munchausen syndrome, make sure you check out our video about Dee Dee Blanchard. It's going to be right over here.
We will see you guys next week. Peace!